has been requested for over a year now by Xavier Lamboy for 824. I promised them that I would do Roberto Clemente this year since they have asked multiple times, so you're welcome. This video is for you, Xavier. Let's get into it. Who was Roberto Clemente? On a sunny autumn day in Puerto Rico in 1952, Roberto Clemente arrived at a ball field wearing beat-up baseball pants. The 18-year-old was carrying his old glove and wore a cap with a long bill. The field was mostly dirt. The baseballs there were used and scuffed. But that didn't matter to the 70 or so young players who had showed up that day. All of them had the same goal: to be discovered by a scout from a major league baseball team. That year, 16 teams based in the United States made up the majors, 8 each in the American and National Leagues. For young ball players like Roberto, making the majors would be a dream come true. Over the next few hours, Roberto did his best to realize that dream. He fired long, perfect throws from the outfield. He whizzed around the bases faster than any other player there. He ran a 60-yard dash in 6.4 seconds, coming very close to the world record at the time, 6.1 seconds. And he hit line drive after line drive. After watching Roberto's performance, it was clear to the scouts that he had the skills to one day make the major leagues. One scout for the Brooklyn Dodgers said Roberto was the greatest natural athlete I've ever seen. A year later, his major league dream came true. He signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers and went on to have one of baseball's most remarkable careers. He worked hard to make the dreams of thousands of other people come true, too. Chapter 1: A Guava Branch Bat. In a town called Carolina, on the northeast corner of the island of Puerto Rico, Roberto Clemente Walker was born on August 18th, 1934. Like many people from the island, he took the last names of both his mother and father. Throughout his life, however, Roberto was known by his father's last name, Clemente. His parents, Melchor and Luisa, had 5 children. Roberto was the youngest. Sadly, his older sister, Anairis, died when Roberto was very young. She was burned in a kitchen accident and never recovered from her injuries. But Roberto still had 3 older brothers. He also had a stepbrother and stepsister, Luisa's children from her first marriage. With a family that big, there was always someone to play with, and what they played was baseball. I loved baseball more than anything, Roberto said later in life. We played all day and wouldn't care if we missed lunch. We played until it was too dark to see. Roberto earned a lifelong family nickname in those years. He did not like to be rushed and often said momentito, momentito, which means just a moment. His friends and family came to call him Moomin. Moomin and his friends and brothers played baseball after school and on weekends. They did not have formal teams and made up their own rules. They made their own gear. Roberto formed baseballs by wrapping old socks or rags very tightly with string and then sewing a piece of cloth over the socks. The boys carved baseball bats from the branches of guava trees. They sometimes hid crushed tin cans. For gloves, they sewed together old coffee sacks. Louisa Walker loved her son, but she worried that he was focusing too much on baseball. There were times he was so much in love with baseball that he didn't even care for food, she said. In fact, she once tried to burn his bat, but Roberto rescued it from the flames. All this playing soon helped Roberto become one of the best young baseball players in Carolina. In a scrapbook of memories, he wrote about a 7.5-hour game in which he hit 10 home runs. He was growing up strong and fast and could throw a baseball harder and farther than anyone else around. He watched a lot of baseball too. To go to a game, his father gave him 25 cents. A game ticket was 15 cents, and the round-trip bus fare was a dime. In the winter, the weather in Puerto Rico was still nice. Top players from the United States often came down to play in Puerto Rico's own professional league. It was a way for them to stay in shape during their off-season. Roberto watched those teams, including his favorite team, the San Juan Senadores. The Senadores played in the island's capital, San Juan, not far from Carolina. Along with baseball, family was the most important thing in young Roberto's life. His family spent most evenings together, telling stories or listening to the radio. His brother, Justino, remembered that they were the first family they knew with a radio. The Clementes were not poor, but they were far from rich. His father, Melchor, worked in a sugar factory, and his mother, Luisa, did laundry for neighbors. Roberto and his brothers sometimes earned money by bringing water to the men working in the sugarcane fields, and Luisa ran a small market in the front of their house to bring in a bit more money. Roberto became known as a boy who was always willing to help out. When he was 11, Roberto went to a school that had no fence around it. He wanted to protect his school and the students, so Roberto rallied friends and neighbors to raise money and build a fence. When he was 12, Roberto helped pull an injured person from a fiery car accident. He had to run across a highway to reach the crash. When he was 14, Roberto was spotted by Roberto Marin, who ran a softball team for a local rice company. Most of the team's players were older. They were men with jobs who played the game after work and on weekends. Marin believed Roberto could play with them. In 1948, when Roberto joined the Sao Rojo rice factory team, he took his big first step into his baseball future. Chapter 2, Here Come the Crabbers. Although Roberto was a star shortstop for the adult baseball team, Sao Rojo, which means red seal, at school, he used his powerful throwing arm to help the track team. He was so good at throwing the javelin that he even had a shot at the Olympics. But by his senior year, he chose to stick with baseball and left the javelin behind. While still in high school, Roberto advanced in baseball to eventually join the Santurce Cangrejeros, which means the Crabbers. Santurce played in the top Puerto Rico Pro Baseball League. These men played baseball for their living. The team was run by Pedro Soria, a man who had come to be known as Mr. Baseball in Puerto Rico. In the fall of 1952, he gave Roberto $40 a week to play for his team. The Crabbers included many top players from Puerto Rico and the United States. Some played or had played in the major leagues. The manager was Buster Clarkson, who had been an infielder in the Negro Leagues in the United States. He played a big part in helping Roberto improve his game. Roberto said that Buster used to tell me, "I am as good as anybody in the big leagues." That helped me a lot. Less than a month after debuting with the Crabbers, Roberto went to a major league tryout. He threw harder and ran faster than any of the other young players. He was so impressive that several teams wanted to sign him up. However, he was still in high school. For Roberto and the scouts who were there that day, the tryout was only a sign of things to come. In the winter of 1953 to 1954, after Roberto had finished high school, he was old enough to go after his biggest goal, signing with a major league team. Puerto Rico's pro teams were good, but the major leagues in the United States were the top of the baseball world. The scouts had watched him play for the Crabbers. Several big league clubs offered him contracts. Braves offered him $30,000, but Roberto stuck with Brooklyn. He could have turned down the Dodgers' lower offer, but as he said later, it was hard, but I said I gave the Dodgers my word. For Roberto, keeping his promise was more important than any amount of money. Roberto's next stop was not Brooklyn, however. It was in far-off Canada. Chapter 3, Far-Off Montreal. The Brooklyn Dodgers sent some of their younger players to Canada's Montreal Royals to improve and prepare for the major leagues. The Royals were part of the Dodgers' minor leagues, teams set up to develop future big league talent. The Dodgers knew Roberto was good, but they also knew he wasn't completely ready yet. Roberto got off to a great start with the Royals. In his first minor league spring training game, he had hit an inside the park home run. But life was hard in Montreal. He was a long way from home, and he was very lonely. It was much colder in Canada than in tropical Puerto Rico. Many people in Montreal spoke only French, while Roberto spoke Spanish and very little English. To make matters worse, his teammates only spoke English. An older player from Cuba named Chico Fernandez, who had been in the minors for several years, taught Roberto how to order ham and eggs in English for breakfast. At least he would not go hungry. For the first time in his life, Roberto was forced to deal with segregation. Segregation means that people are kept separate at restaurants, in hotels, in movie theaters, even at drinking fountains, according to the color of their skin. Though he was Puerto Rican, to people outside his island home he was black. Canada was tolerant of all races, but in the 1950s in many parts of the United States, black people were considered second-class citizens. During a trip with the Royals to Richmond, Virginia, for example, Roberto and other black players were told they could not eat at a restaurant with their white teammates. They had to take their meals at a restaurant that was for blacks only. This was upsetting to Roberto, especially because back home in Puerto Rico, segregation did not exist. I don't believe in color, he later said. I believe in people. Roberto did not play often in Montreal. He would have a good game and then sit out several games in a row. Sometimes his coach would substitute a pitch hitter, even when Roberto knew he could drive in runs. He became very confused and wondered why he wasn't playing every game and why the team wasn't making better use of his skills. Roberto told his brother Justino he was thinking of coming home. I never thought I would reach such heights, Roberto said later. Then I did, and they wouldn't let me play. In fact, the Dodgers had a plan to hide Roberto. Because Roberto had been signed to a one-year contract with Montreal, at the end of the year he would be eligible to be drafted by another team under the rules of Major League Baseball at that time. The Dodgers thought playing in the minors would give Roberto a chance to get even better. The next season, the Dodgers hoped to bring him up to the majors. In the meantime, they were hoping no one would find their gem, Roberto, in the minor leagues in Canada. When the Royals' season was over, Roberto returned home to Puerto Rico to live with his family. He also rejoined the Centercy Crabbers and helped them win the league championship. Roberto played left field. The center fielder that season was the great Willie Mays. Mays was already a World Series hero for the New York Giants and would go on to hit 660 homers in his Hall of Fame career. Like many major leaguers, Mays often played in Puerto Rico during the winter months when Major League Baseball was not in season. The Crabbers went on to win the 1955 Caribbean Series and are still considered one of the best teams ever to play in Puerto Rico. The news was not all good for Roberto during the Crabbers' season. On his way to visit his stepbrother Luis in the hospital, another driver hit the car Roberto was driving. Roberto hurt his neck and back, but he did not get medical help at the time. Luis York City changed Roberto's life in a more positive way. Roberto Clemente's talent was too big to hide, even in Canada. The Dodgers' secret was out, and Roberto was now eligible to be drafted by another team. At the meeting, the Pittsburgh Pirates chose Roberto. Moman had made it to the major leagues for real this time. Chapter 4, Welcome to the Bigs. Each year, baseball teams prepare for the season at spring training. They work out and practice their skills. For young players, it's also a chance to demonstrate their skills. For Roberto, it was just another strange place to get used to. Though Roberto had seen segregation in this time with the Royals, spring training with the Pirates in Florida was much worse. The team trained in Fort Myers. The white Pirates players stayed at a fancy hotel. The black players stayed across town in homes owned by black people. They were not allowed in the nice hotel. White players enjoyed trips to golf clubs and swimming pools. Black players were not invited. Even at the ballpark, there was segregation. There were separate sections for black and white fans. There were even separate water fountains. This separation of the races was still shocking to Roberto. There were black and white people in Puerto Rico, but they were not separate. Back in Pennsylvania, it was difficult for Roberto to get to know his new teammates on the Pittsburgh Pirates since he did not speak English very well. Not to speak the language, he said later, that is a terrible problem. It meant you were different. He told one writer, I didn't even know where Pittsburgh was. In the early 1950s, the Pirates were not a very good team. They had not been to the World Series since 1927. They had not had a winning season since 1948. Roberto got into his first Major League regular season game on April 17th, 1955. It was against the Brooklyn Dodgers, the team that had originally signed him. In his first at-bat, he got his first career hit, an infield single. The Dodgers probably wondered if they had made a mistake by trying to hide Roberto in the minors rather than bringing him right up. For the next several months, he did very well, hitting over .300. As the summer wore on, however, his hitting numbers started to slide. One reason was that he was lonely. Roberto still missed his family and friends back in Puerto Rico. He didn't fit in with the American black players because he spoke little English. And he didn't fit in with most white players either. His closest friends that year were the Garlands, a black couple with whom he roomed. They introduced Roberto to their friends, cooked dinner for him, and helped him to feel more comfortable in his new surroundings. Roberto missed a few games that season when his back was sore. It still bothered him after the car accident. Then and now, baseball players are expected to be tough and to play through minor injuries. When he asked for time off or talked about his injuries, he was sometimes ridiculed by other players, including his teammates. They wondered if he was faking his injuries or exaggerating them, and they didn't like complainers. When the 1955 season was over, Roberto again headed home to Puerto Rico for the winter. The Pirates were pleased with his performance that season, but knew he could do better. I would say that it was obvious that he had not played much professional baseball, that he had things to learn, Pirates president Joe Brown said, but it was even more obvious that he had great talent. Chapter 5, Home and Way. Roberto spent the next several years that way, playing in Pittsburgh in the summer and then living and playing in Puerto Rico in the winter. Slowly, Roberto became more comfortable in Pittsburgh. Little by little, his English improved. However, sports reporters still had trouble speaking with him. Some of the reporters were not kind to Roberto. They wrote down what he said in a way that made him sound uneducated. When he said hit, they wrote heat. When he said big leagues, they wrote big leagues. The way they wrote made fun of his heavy Spanish accent. Then, in 1957, his official baseball card printed his name as Bob Clemente, not Roberto. mistake would be repeated for several more years. For a man with such pride in his heritage, this was a great insult. Because of such treatment, Roberto became determined to turn the fire that burned inside him into success on the ball field. Roberto didn't hit many home runs, but stroked line drive hits into the outfield. On defense, he was outstanding. He showed time and again why he had the best throwing arm in the sport. Meanwhile, when he played back home in the Puerto Rican League, he encouraged younger ball players and helped support his family with the money he was making on the baseball diamond. He bought his parents a home. He helped his brothers and his nieces and nephews too. In late 1958, Roberto took a break from baseball and went to South Carolina to train with the United States Marines. In those days, all healthy young American men, including those from Puerto Rico, had to serve some time in the military. Roberto signed up for the Marine Reserves. After his training was over in early 1959, he was a Marine, but he would only have to serve in case of a war. After training for the Marines, it was back to baseball. By 1960, after 5 seasons in the major leagues, Roberto was still not a star. He knew that he had to step up his game to make himself and the Pirates into winners. Sorry if you can hear my upstairs neighbors during this. They were silent before I started. Once I hit record, they start throwing things and stomping. I don't know what's happening up there, so I apologize if you can hear them. But Chapter 6, 1960. Roberto got off to a great start in the 1960 season. In the first 4 months, he was among the best hitters in the league and was driving in more runs than ever. He was a National League, or NL, Player of the Month for May. In July, Roberto was named to the NL All-Star team for the first time. The Pirates were doing very well too, which was a big change from recent seasons. As the summer continued, more and more people saw what his teammates already knew. Roberto Clemente was now one of the top outfielders in baseball. Roberto ended up this season with his best batting average yet and 4th best in the NL. He also led the Pirates with 94 runs batted in and set a new career high with 16 home runs. On September 25th, the Pirates clinched the NL championship. That put them in the World Series for the first time in 33 years. Luisa Clemente and Roberto's brother, Martino, flew up to Pittsburgh to watch Roberto play in the World Series. Roberto's father, Melchor, was afraid of flying. He stayed home in Carolina and listened to his son's games on the radio. years, and because of his trouble with English, Roberto had never really connected with most of the men who wrote about the team. However, he had connected with the Pittsburgh fans. My biggest thrill was when I come out of the clubhouse after the last series game and saw thousands of fans in the street, he said. I did not feel like a player at the time. I felt like one of those people, and I walked the streets among them. Back home in Puerto Rico, he was greeted as a hero, but he always remembered how that MVP vote had made him feel. Chapter 7, Honors and Marriage. As good as he was on the field, Roberto was still facing racism off it. At this time in America, the question of civil rights, equal rights for people of all races, was a major issue. He was not afraid to speak about his feelings. During spring training before the 1961 season, he and other black teammates still lived apart from the white players. Roberto said, in a way, it was like being in prison. Everybody else on the team has fun during spring training. They swim, play golf, and go to the beaches. The only thing we can do is put in time until we head north. It's no fun. Roberto watched the news about the civil rights movement closely. He greatly admired its leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King later visited Puerto Rico and spent time with Roberto and his family. But Roberto soon turned his focus back to the ball field. In 1961, Roberto was the top hitter in the National League. His batting average of .351 was better than any other NL player. Along with improving his hitting, Roberto continued to be a fantastic right fielder. After the 1961 season, he won the Gold Glove, given to players for fielding excellence. Players and coaches voted to choose the best player at each position in each league. Roberto would go on to win the Gold Glove award every season after that. His career total of 12 Gold Gloves is still tied for most all-time among outfielders with Willie Mays, his former teammate on the Crabbers. After the 1961 season, Roberto was given a silver bat trophy for his batting title. When he returned home later to Puerto Rico, he said, "In the name of my family, in the name of Puerto Rico, and in the name of all the players who didn't have a chance to play for Puerto Rico in the big leagues, I thank you." Whenever he could, Roberto talked about Puerto Rico. He was enormously proud of his island home. He returned there every autumn throughout his career. He was thankful to the older players who had helped him learn the game, and he spent as much time as he could helping younger players improve their skills. In early 1964, while in Puerto Rico, Roberto met a young woman named Vera Zabala at a drugstore and quickly fell in love. He pursued her with the same passion that he showed on the baseball field. Vera Zabala was 22 years old and had a job at a bank. When Roberto introduced himself, she was polite, but that was all. She knew he was one of the most famous people on the island, but she was not a baseball fan. Over the next several months, Roberto asked her out again and again. He visited her at the bank and sent her letters. Eventually, Roberto won her over. She agreed to date him, but only after getting permission from her parents. On the day of their first date, Roberto picked her up at the bank. Vera's coworkers were so excited to see the baseball star, they all came out on the street to watch the couple leave. Roberto was in a hurry. The first time he came to my home, Roberto said he was going to marry me, Vera remembered. A few dates later, he brought pictures of houses. He also brought a diamond ring. He soon went to Vera's father and asked if he could marry her. Mr. Zabala was afraid that Roberto was a big star who would want to date many other women. "I can walk down to the corner and probably get 10 girls," Roberto told him, "but I don't care. The woman I love is here." Roberto and Vera were married on November 14th, 1964. Chapter 8, Family First. Along with his success on the baseball field, Roberto now had something else to be proud of: his growing family. Roberto and Vera had their first son, Roberto Jr., in August 1964. when he could, he avoided other commitments to spend time with his family. There'd be no baseball talk at the house unless there'd be visitors who'd begin asking questions. Back in Pittsburgh with the Pirates, he tried to stay healthy. He made a drink out of raw eggs, sugar, and fruit juice to give him strength. Don't do that, please. And he had a spoonful of honey before each game, but he still battled a series of small injuries to his back, legs, elbow, and shoulder. In 1966, Roberto finally earned the National League Most Valuable Player Award. It's the highest honor a player can hope for, he said. Of course, it could have gone to Sandy Koufax, but I had the best season of my career, and I was confident the sports writers would vote for me. I'm thankful they did. In 1967, he won his fourth NL batting championship with a .357 average, the highest of his career. Roberto still one of only 8 players ever to win that many NL batting titles. Despite his growing fame, Roberto answered his fan mail regularly. He always sorted it so that first he would answer the letters from children in cities where the Pirates would be playing next. And he often visited children in hospitals as the team made its way around the country. He once said that he signed more than 20,000 autographs a year. At home, he wanted to use his fame and money to build a huge sports park in Puerto Rico. On one large site, he planned to construct sports fields, gyms, and classrooms. Children from around the island could come there to learn new sports and improve their skills. He found land for this project and started raising money to buy it and build his dream. In 1969, he and Vera were delighted when their third son, Enrique, was born. He continued to work with many young players from Latin America who were arriving in the United States to play in the majors. The success of Roberto and other players from the Caribbean led the Major League Baseball teams to scout for and hire more Caribbean ball players. Roberto made sure to meet with the new players as he traveled from city to city. He would take them out to dinner or give them advice about how to adjust to life in the United States and the big leagues. Chapter 9, Back to the Top. By 1970, Roberto's many good deeds had become well known. On July 24th, the Pirates honored him with a special ceremony at their home ballpark in Pittsburgh. Dozens of friends and family flew up from Puerto Rico for Roberto Clemente night. Even Melchor came up with Luisa, finally overcoming his fear of flying. His wife and sons looked on proudly. Speeches were made in Spanish and English, honoring and thanking Roberto. Roberto asked people to donate money to a Pittsburgh Children's Hospital rather than to honor him with gifts. In early 1971, at a banquet in Houston, Roberto was given the Tris Speaker Memorial Award as top player by the Baseball Writers Association of America. They were among the same people who had insulted him in the past, the same men who had once made fun of his accent. This time they chose him for his achievement on and off the field. By speaking out against racism, by always encouraging Puerto Ricans, and by giving time and money to make others' lives better, Roberto had become more than just a ball player. The writers had finally recognized that. In a speech accepting the award, he said these memorable words about his life and his goals. If you have a chance to accomplish something that will make things better for people coming behind you, and you don't do that, you're wasting your time on this earth. The 1971 season was another triumph for the Pirates and for Roberto. That year, the Pirates won the NL East Division in the regular season. That sent them to the playoffs, where they beat the San Francisco Giants. Go Giants. That victory gave Pittsburgh a matchup against the Baltimore Orioles in the World Series. Just to reach the first game of the World Series, however. Oh, that's not a period. However, Roberto had to rally himself one more time. While in Baltimore before the first game, he became very ill with food poisoning. The doctor was worried, and I was worried, said Vera. He didn't sleep well, but he went to the game and played well. his other children, and new clothes for Vera. He had many presents for his parents and other relatives. In late December, a terrible earthquake struck Nicaragua. Many of the people Roberto had just met were killed or injured. 5 square miles in the center of the city of Managua were destroyed. Roberto immediately started to help. He organized a drive to raise money and gather needed supplies such as food, medicine, and clothing. He went on TV and radio and urged people to give money and support to the earthquake victims. Soon a plane was making flights from Puerto Rico to Nicaragua. Not long after the supplies began arriving in Nicaragua, Roberto heard they were being misused and not always given to those who needed them most. He was shocked, but he knew what he had to do. He would go himself to make sure that the people, his friends, got what they needed. As he was getting ready to leave for Nicaragua, he found that there was too much to carry in one plane. To take all the supplies that people had donated, Roberto hired a second plane. He did not know that the second plane had recently been in a crash. He did not know that most of the crew had little experience flying this kind of large aircraft. He did not know that they overloaded the plane by thousands of pounds. He only wanted to help. Just after 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, the plane carrying Roberto and the relief supplies lumbered down the runway in San Juan. The aircraft slowly rose, but just barely cleared the trees at the end of the runway. A moment later, one engine made a loud bang. The pilot tried to turn around, but it was too late. The airplane was over the ocean. It could not turn back. The airplane crashed into the sea. As word got out, thousands of people rushed to the beach near the crash site. Divers went into the water. Boats looked for survivors and wreckage. They searched for days. Almost nothing was ever found. The entire island and the baseball world started the new year, 1973, with sad and shocking news. Roberto Clemente was dead at the age of 38. Chapter 11, His Legacy Today. All of baseball was stunned by Roberto's death. His family could not believe it, but they were all proud of what people said about Roberto. Letters and notes poured in from all over. Teammates and other friends flew from Pittsburgh to Puerto Rico for a funeral mass. Eventually, money raised in his name would help build a children's wing for a hospital in Nicaragua. Just a few days after he died, the Baseball Hall of Fame announced that he could be voted in right away. Normally, a player must wait 5 years after his career ends to earn this honor. But after the voting was over, Roberto was named to the Hall of Fame in March 1973. It was only the second time that the baseball writers who vote for the Hall of Fame had done this for a player. The first was for Yankees first baseman Lou Gehrig in 1939. Also that year, Major League Baseball created the Roberto Clemente Award. It is given each season to a player who continues Roberto's legacy. The winning player must excel on the field and be a great help to his community and to the world. The U.S. government honored Roberto as well. President Richard Nixon was one of the first to personally donate money to help build Roberto's longed-for sports center in Puerto Rico. In May 1973, Nixon gave the first Presidential Citizens Medal to Roberto. Vera traveled to the White House to accept the honor. "I think you would be proud to be the first American to get this medal," she said. In 1974, Ciudad Deportiva Roberto Clemente, or Roberto Clemente Sports City, opened in Carolina. Vera went on to run the site for decades. "When he died, I felt the responsibility to make a reality of a sports city," Vera Clemente said. "My main purpose was to do what he was planning this video relaxing and educational.